Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and to another layout design video. This offering is a little bit unusual in that instead of presenting one layout design from start to finish, I'm covering two designs that never got completed for one reason or another. They both have a lot in common. They're both steel mill layouts. Long-time viewers may recall seeing a couple of steel mill layouts on this channel before. There is this design that I presented a couple of years back where one of the three rooms was devoted to a steel mill. And then there was this enormous three-level layout where approximately half of the main level was devoted to a steel mill. No, I'm not going through either of those again. I'm just using those by way of reference. Just in case anyone wants to go back and check out those videos again, I will put links to them in the description below. But the focus of this video is to present two other steel mill layouts. I feel they're worth doing because there are plenty of lessons to be learned even from incomplete designs. Here is a more modest sized layout design that I presented a few months ago, and this one is relevant because viewers may recognize the room shape. It is the same room that the first of the incomplete steel mills was designed for. Yes, I do have several repeat customers when it comes to layout design. Here's what I was presented with for the first layout that the customer wanted me to design. He already had a working railroad in his attic. It was designed and built by another professional, and although the layout was well built and reliable and running well, the client felt that he wasn't getting everything that he wanted. Now, some of the layout was devoted to selected steel mill industries. There was a rolling mill on this point, there was a blast furnace here, and a coke works at the end. The client was interested in turning the entire layout into a steel mill and representing more of the steelmaking process. This is not the whole of the original layout, not allowed to present that. It's just what was left after removing about half the track that we felt we were going to have to go before we could turn it into a steel mill. This was as much of the layout as I thought we could possibly salvage. The green areas show three portions of the room which were not utilized and we felt were useful land grabs. Although we didn't want to go any further in this direction because there's a living area and a bar over there. Anyway, after a lot of back and forth with the client, this is what I came up with. It's possible to compare it with the original design because the red, or rather pinkish design, is the proposed benchwork edge for the new layout, and the green line is the outline of the original benchwork. As you can see, I kept most of the mainline circuit, although I did have to delete a lot more than I thought I was going to, because this corner of the main line had that awkward reverse curve in it, which was just eating up too much space. I moved the blast furnace from this location and put it right in the center of the layout on a peninsula. And I doubled it up as well, because almost invariably steel mills have multiple blast furnaces. And I felt that two was going to be a lot more reasonable than just one. I would like to have got a third one, but on such a small layout, that wasn't feasible. In getting the track round behind them with what is called the high line for materials delivery, I took a feature from a very large steel mill owned by the Ford Motor Company, where the track cuts through the corner of the blower house due to lack of space. And not only does that add a lot of interest, but it means that the blower house could be much more in proportion with the blast furnaces. And moving them here also freed up this area of the benchwork for a car and locomotive service area, which I felt really need to be located near the yard, which of course I put along the only decent length straight portion of the railroad. Note, of course, it is not a complete design. As I said earlier, I never did complete the design, and I'll get to that in a minute. The open hearth furnace building is always an interesting structure with its long row of tall chimneys, and that I put over the stairwell, where it forms a really good backdrop to the yard. The backside of the continuous loop is a 4-track through staging yard, and although it is way smaller than the staging yards that I normally like to add to railroads, it only has to accommodate transfer runs between the steel railroad and the Class 1 line that feeds it. We have a small 3-track Class 1 yard adjacent to the 5-track steel mill yard. Both yards are probably way too small, but it's all that we had room for. And the rest of the space, both on the peninsula and around the other two sides of the room, is filled up with a variety of typical steel mill structures. Note, of course, that many of these structures would be completely impossible to model on a normal sized railroad. Rolling mills, for example, are typically several hundred yards wide and up to a mile long. So just modeling the corner of such a structure on the backdrop makes a lot more sense than attempting to build one with all four sides. Anyway, this design followed several false starts that didn't actually fit. But after I'd drawn this version, I sent it off to the customer, and I was actually quite confident that he was going to like it. I didn't hear from him for a while, and then I got quite a long letter from him. And apparently he did very much like the design. His problem was that he felt that we hadn't kept enough of the existing layout. And yes, I believe he's right. There is very little of the existing layout that doesn't get torn apart. There is the main line from where the mouse is now around to the start of the swing gate and the coke plant. And that's about all that would remain of the original layout. And this complicated area of turnouts in this location would also have to be modified, so some of that's going to have to come up as well. And the client felt that by the time he had torn apart everything that wasn't going to remain, he wouldn't really have any layout left. So it was basically starting again. And he didn't feel he wanted to do that. So he decided to continue with the existing layout, even though it really wasn't satisfying him operationally. So there's one fairly compact steel mill railroad that never got to be completed. Here is another one for a much larger railroad. This is only part of a giant basement-sized layout, which has already been under construction for many years. Once again, I'm not permitted to show the full design, which is why everything is blanked out. All it shows is a partial footprint indicating the area that I have available. And I always wanted to present this design mainly for personal reasons. The main layout, I am told, was designed a long time ago by none other than John Armstrong. Anybody who's been in model railroads for any length of time will know that name. And although the mainline portion of the railroad took up the entire basement, there was a narrow strip around one side, where I'm circulating the mouse now, which was available for an addition, and the client wanted to put a steel mill there. Now, I was not the first person to be given this task. The owner and builder had already had a go at it himself, and I think he had also contracted at least one other layout designer, but the builder wasn't happy with any of the designs. Now, he was already aware that he didn't really have enough space for a full steel mill, but he wanted to give the impression of the steel making process. Here is the first one I came up with. I put the interchange yard in the only sensible location for it. I felt that these two wider corners in the bottom alcove were going to need to contain the coke plant and the blast furnace, because they were likely to be the only portions of benchwork wide enough to do so. And then I suggested locations for various other steel mill industries. I'm not going to read all the labels, since I figure most of my viewers can do that themselves. I recall the client's main objection to this plan was the large single yard. He wanted the steel mill to have multiple small yards serving various portions of the process. And he also felt that we didn't need the coke plant. That's one thing that we could get rid of and he wouldn't miss it too much. So I went with a second version. Here, although the main yard is still in the same location, it's actually 3 smaller yards now. We have the longer tracks in front for the Class 1 railroad and 2 shorter yards behind it, all 3 double-ended, but each of those 2 yards serves different portions of the steel mill. And joined together on the same track, they do allow easy transfer between them. And with the coke plant eliminated, there is room for a rather cramped yard in this area serving the blast furnace, which I've named Furnace Yard. I developed this corner in a little bit more detail, but I put the lower house behind it. I put a mirror in this corner, angled slightly, but it's impossible for operators to see their own reflection. The red line there shows the limit of what can be shown, but it allows the single blast furnace to look like 2, one either side of the blower house. And there is a start of a dummy yard against this wall, which I'm calling coke yard, and we're assuming that the coke plant is the other side. The other objection the client had with the previous plan was that he wanted to run the slag trains a significant distance. If you recall, I put the slag track in this corner, but he wanted it at the opposite end of the railroad so that he could run them a considerable distance and dump slag in this corner. Anyway, at this point in the discussion, I discovered that the area behind this wall was a furnace room, and the client had 2 separate furnace rooms in his home. And it was felt likely that at some point in the future, when eventually the furnaces were due for replacement, he would combine them into the other end, and this room might be available to add the coke plant and associated yards, and to do a much better job of them than we could hope to with the limited space that we currently have available. So here is what I came up with using that area. Most of the rest of the layout is the same. The orange blocks are areas where various equipment prevent access. There was just about enough space to run a pair of tracks between equipment at this point. That is the track that goes to the other blast furnace, the one in the mirror. And it allows the customer to double the number of slag cars and bottle cars in those respective trains. And then the larger gap between appliances allows a couple of diagonal tracks so that the dummy coke yard is now partially serviceable. The 2 extended tracks allow enough operation to suggest to operators that the coke plant does in fact actually exist. We had some more discussion, and I did draw one more plan. This hasn't changed much. In fact, I think the only area that changed is this portion where he was trying to get away from having all the buildings parallel with the wall. But this version was short-lived because at this point the client decided not to continue with phase 2 of the design. He was feeling that the space he had available along this wall just was not the right shape and didn't lend itself to representing a steel mill in a manner that pleased him. So he elected not to continue with phase 2 of the project, which I was actually quite disappointed with because I felt that this design had promise. Anyway, I don't know whether any other designers have had a go at this since. I would be interested in finding out. If this gentleman did ever get a design for a steel mill that pleased him, then I'd be very interested in seeing it, so that I can learn from it what I could have done. And of course, that is how we all improve. We learn from both our own mistakes and the work of other people. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. I don't know how satisfying it's going to be to my viewers. And in fact, I don't even know how satisfying it's going to be to me once I've finished editing it. But either way, I will sign off here, and I hope to see you back next week. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.